People at the back, if my voice drops, will you yell or wave or something? Because this microphone is on, I believe, but I'm not sure if it's picking up. Okay, so in the short time, I'm going to get straight into this by looking at first some of the descriptors that we see in the Australian curriculum, all the different state versions of it. As I think it's only New South Wales and Victoria that have their own versions, something about New South Wales and Victoria, but I would say another company, but not present company. But they seem to want to have their own version. But this is a basic message from the Australian curriculum for English, is that, well, look, you're reading what's on the screen now, I hope, but a key word there is combining. And all the way through it, I find this word combining. And it's talking about the fact that we have to combine context, semantics, grammar and phonic knowledge when we're working in some sort of literate practice. But I don't see anywhere in our new curriculum that we can teach phonics in isolation, or indeed that we can abandon meaning. You see, the whole of the Australian curriculum is meaning-based. And I also approve 100% of the definition of decoding in the Australian curriculum, and I wish we could start using that term correctly. But decoding is a process of working out a meaning of words in a text. In decoding, readers draw on contextual, vocabulary, grammatical and phonic knowledge. That gets the big green tick from me. So the decoding is not equivalent to or equal to or synonymous with phonics or simply sounding out. The decoding is actually comprehending. If we're not getting meaning or comprehending, we're not decoding. And remember, it's all about combining semantics, context, syntax, grammar, phonics, okay? And that what people are often talking about when they use the word decoding, they're really talking about recoding. Recoding is simply going from the printed code to the oral code, but with no meaning attached. And of course, that's all you can do with nonsense words, because by definition, they have no meaning. Okay, so for example, an example used not by me, but an example used in Multilit itself refers to this GAMP. And the belief is that if you can look at the printed GAMP and you can sound it out GAMP, then you're reading. Could anyone in the audience please indicate to me the meaning of GAMP? No? No meaning involved? No? Okay. What really see, that's recoding. It's going from the printed code to the oral code. It is not decoding. And let's actually clear that up once and for all, okay? And what my question is to people who believe in the use of nonsense words, well, if you want to use GAMP, tell me, why wouldn't you use camp or damp or lamp? I mean, for goodness sake. Okay. And I think I'm in New South Wales, right? I woke up in Victoria, but I'm in New South Wales now, and people from New South Wales, you might be interested to know that right back in 2012, your education department commissioned a report into Multilit, and in the report they prepared, they clearly recommended that the nonsense words should be taken out. And that was in New South Wales just in 2012. And I want to prove to you that phonics alone is not enough to decode. We actually need a meaningful context. It's the meaning that makes the phonics work, okay? Every one of you in this room now has phonics knowledge and you know how to use it. If I picked on someone now to read that word on the screen, in fact I will. I'm going to pick on one of you to read that in a minute, but here's the condition. It's a NAPLAN condition. You're only allowed one correct answer. You are not allowed to say it's this or it's that. And if you do, I will shame you publicly. Okay. So let me pick. Who should I pick on? Oh, yes.
Lead.
Everyone tell her what it should be. Sorry, what's your name? Oh, it's Robin. Robin, see, aren't they so nasty? They could have said lead to support you. Maybe now we need some pastoral care. But listen, no one in the room can read that word, neither can I, because I don't know what it means. But now Robin could easily read it. The lead singer wrote his music with a lead pencil. You see, because I have the meaning now, I can make the phonics work. Okay, and is this tear or tear? No one in this room can tell me until I give it to them in a meaningful context. Is this permit or permit? No one can read that word, no one, unless they've given a meaningful context. Okay, so without meaning or structure, we can't always use our graphophonic knowledge. So what's the point? What's the point of having graphophonic knowledge if we can't use it because meaning and or structure are missing? Okay, so the main message here is that phonology simply can't work without meaning and structure, and you've just seen that for real words, but real words in isolation. So even real words in isolation can be problematic in terms of reading them if the phonics can work in more than one way. And we need the evidence from meaning and structure to tell us how that phonics is going to work. Well, if some real words in isolation are problematic, can you imagine how can we possibly decode nonsense words? Because remember, decoding is comprehending, decoding is getting meaning. If you're only going from the printed code to the oral code, it's recoding, not decoding. These three words come from one of the UK phonics test, the test that is being proposed by our federal government for testing all Year 1 kids in Australia. Now, I've taken those three words from one of the tests, and we have huge problems knowing how to sound it out, because you see the first one? Is it food, plood? Is it good, plud? Or is it blood, plud? And of course the tests allow only one correct answer. And if you don't guess the correct one, well, tough. I nearly said tough, treating me. Okay, so look, apart from the fact that this is an appalling test of phonics knowledge, it's also immoral, because there are three possible correct answers, but only one is allowed. And what about, is it shove, puv, move, poov, stove, pove? Haven't got a clue. And is it bowl, knoll, foul, now? Well, please look at the screen carefully now, because this is what should happen, right? Now, I want you, on your handout, I forgot to look, have you got the word sign on there 5 times? No. If you haven't, please write the word sign 5 times vertically. I should have put them in to save the time. Okay, I want you to leave the first sign as it is, as the word sign. I want you to turn the second one into signal, and the third one into signature. The fourth one, assign, and the last one, design. Okay, and this is probably what you have done. Signal, signature, assign, design. Now, you see, look at the first word, sign. The G in that word has absolutely no phonological function. Why is it there? It's there because it has a morphological function. It's referring to meaning. And the key base word, the key unit of meaning here, the morpheme that is consistent in all 5 words, is S-I-G-N. And that key unit of meaning, or a morpheme, we do not change its spelling even if the pronunciation changes. because it's helping us to recognise that those words are related by meaning. What is a signal? It is a sign. What's a signature? It's a personal sign. Every one of those words belong to the same meaning family, and it's the meaning that determines how we spell it, how we sound it out, and everything else we do. And what about the s in a sign, but z in design? You see, the spelling hasn't changed. It's more tied to meaning, more tied to morphemes and how they work than phonemes. So we cannot teach phonics as if there's a one-to-one relationship between letters and sounds. Now, you know that. Yep. We've all known that for centuries. Okay. But letters obviously do not always have a phonological function. They very often have a morphological function, and in fact the G in sign, as we've just said, it's not pronounced, it indicates meaning, and it belongs to that meaning family. Meaning family, okay? So here's the truth of it. Graphemes and phonemes actually do not exist outside of morphemes or units of meaning. They simply don't exist outside a morpheme. Okay? But meaning is what determines the sound represented by a particular letter or letter cluster. Okay? Now consider this, O-O-T. If that letter cluster appeared in a nonsense word in a test, I wonder how we, educated literate adults, might tackle it. You see, let's say we get it in the word D-O-O-T in the proposed Year 1 phonics test. How would I pronounce it? Because it could rhyme with foot, doot, but it could also rhyme with boot, foot, doot, right? So it could be, see, it's too hard. Okay. When meaning's not involved, okay. So even if you guess the pronunciation required by the test, you've still only recoded, not decoded. We must clarify the distinction between decoding and recoding, call them for what they are, and the phonocentric approaches being pushed at the moment totally misunderstand the difference between those two concepts. So our orthographic system, or our spelling system, is absolutely not all about sound, and it's certainly not about simple letter-sound relationships. And Pete Bowers, and actually it's his brother, is a linguist. Pete Bauer is the educator. They're writing, they've sent me a draft of what they're writing at the moment. It will be published this year. And English is a morphophonemic system in which spellings have evolved to represent sound or phonemes, meaning, morphemes, and history, etymology. And you have an extra quote about that, supporting that on your handout from Vinetsky. Okay, so how do you think O-V-E is pronounced? Because it could be of, as in love. It could be oov, as in move. It could be ove, as in stove. So O-V-E on its own, we can't say at all how it might be pronounced. We can only give possible alternatives. And what about the E-W? How are we going to pronounce that? It could be O, as in so. It could be oo, as in new. Okay, but I want you to jot down on your handout now, write any symbols that make sense to you, but write symbols to tell me how many sounds can you hear in the word new. Okay, now I'm going to move, that's coming up on the next slide, so I'm not going to comment now, but I want you to write down how many sounds in that word. So let's look at EU in a few other words. You see, EU is often oo, as in ch, oo, b, oo, oo. Okay, so it's often just oo. But what about this word nu Does anyone read that word as new, or do you say new? What about foo? Foo is another cartoon character, but this word on the screen is few. So in fact, in these words, we hear a slight y sound, new, and few. So what are we finding? What's this telling us? We even have sounds in our words with no letter to represent them. We have sounds in our words with no letter to represent them. And in fact, the first sound in one, if you're talking about the numeral one, the first sound is w. There is no letter to represent it. Okay, so we have sounds with no letters to represent them, but we also have letters that we call silent letters. We have letters that have no sound, and we have sounds with no letters. How can the phonocentric people live with these facts? I mean, these are facts. So I just don't understand it. Okay, so we have sounds in words without a letter. Our orthography is absolutely not all about sound. Look at music, I love it. None of us say music, right? But isn't it strange? There are other words where it's... What about, there's muesli? Muesli. Some people do say muesli. Okay, so synthetic phonics advocates choose to ignore the difficulties manufactured by their own phonocentric view of how the English orthography works. And because they are so phonocentric, it raises all these problems and difficulties, but they don't address them, they just ignore them as far as I know, because I've seen nothing written, no research papers or anything on their confusion. And look at OUGH. It represents 6 possible sounds. So what are they? You see, in rough, tough, it says an uff. Cough, off. Thought, or. Though, oh. Through, ooh. Drought, ow. So OUGH can represent at least 6 different sounds, and you simply don't know unless those letter clusters are inside a morpheme. So I repeat, morphemes dictate how phonemes express themselves. And phonemes can't express themselves outside of a morpheme. It's just not possible, okay? So if you have OUGH inside a morpheme, then you know how it's to be pronounced. And a morpheme is a unit of meaning. Nonsense words have no meaning. We need another flame, but I don't think I put one there. Okay. There are other difficulties for phonocentric people. This is not a difficulty with English. Please be quite certain that I'm not saying these are difficulties with the English orthography. The English orthography makes total sense when we consider phonology and morphology and etymology. But if you only consider phonology, then you have all sorts of problems. Now, most Australians, I think, say tube the same way that I say it, but many young people say tube, and many Americans say tube, right? So clearly, our alphabet has limitations when it comes to representing sound, okay? But that's the key here. Our alphabet is not just there to represent sound. It's much bigger than that. Okay, and I'm not going to go on a mission for this yet, maybe 2019. But phonics is actually a term I would prefer to drop because it's an educational term, it's not a linguistic one, and it refers to letter-sound relationships in an over-simplistic way. And I am very impressed by the work of Pete Bowers, Canadian, and by the way, he's coming to the ALIA National Conference in Melbourne. Oh, am I allowed to say that? Yeah. Too bad. He's coming to the ALIA National Conference in Literacy in Melbourne, so I expect to see every one of you there in Melbourne, July next year. And a lot of Australian educators would be well advised to go and hear Dr. Pete Bowers, okay, from Canada. And I have started adopting the term that he uses, which is orthographic phonology. Ortho, simply Greek for correct or right or straight. So in this sense, it means orthocorrect, the correct written symbol representations of our phonological system, which is phonics, but it's recognising that it's not just about simple grapheme-phoneme relationships, it's grapheme-phoneme relationships and how they operate within the constraints of morphology and etymology. But I'm not going to start trying to get everybody to talk about orthographic phonology. There are more important things to focus on. But I agree that that would be a much more appropriate term, and that phonics, I wish it had outlived its day, but anyway. So it's essential, given the nature of our orthography, that we consider morphology as well as phonology and etymology. And, you know, we can do that when we start with meaning. And please let me remind you, the official Australian curriculum for English is meaning-centred. In fact, the logo they chose for English has right in the middle of it, making meaning. It's central. And that means for the whole of the English curriculum. It doesn't mean just for this bit, but not for those bits. Okay? So we always start with meaning, and if we're talking about teaching, I'm going to use the word phonics because that's where we are, okay? It's where we are. We might move past it one day. But if we want to teach phonics and teach it well in the early years, we must start with meaning, and often that meaning is provided for us by the wonderful creators of these fantastic books that we have. And I'm indebted to the authors and the illustrators for providing us today with so many of these wonderful books. And look at the Really Rude Rhino. Oh my goodness me. That Really Rude Rhino, he's so rude, and look, he's even showing a bit of dangerous anatomy on the front cover. And you see, there's not one 5 or 6-year-old that's not going to go hysterical about the Really Rude Rhino. Well, guess what? Laughing kids learn. Laughing kids learn. And I've never heard a kid laugh chanting "ants in the apple." Okay. So the Really Rude Rhino, is there anyone in here who truly doesn't believe that they could then take that wonderful book, and when the kids ask for it the next day, because they will, and do you know what? They're going to get it the next day, but isn't it better if they ask? And when they ask for it the next day, and we have the Really Rude Rhino, I'm going to say, can you say it like this with me? And hopefully there'll be a kid in my room who can roll R, because I can't. Really Rude Rhino. And then we're going to highlight that initial consonant sound, and it's all through the ear first. I haven't got a pen in my hand or a piece of chalk in my hand or anything. We're just doing it through the ear. And then I'm going to say, stand up if your name starts with R. And one, you know, Roberta stands up and Robbie stands up. So does James, but that's all right. Well, but it's early prep. It's early prep. Okay, so it's an early kinder. So you see, with the Really Rude Rhino, I will highlight the R sound, and then I will write up the words that start with that sound, and we'll talk about, oh, what do you notice? Look at the letter that starts those words. And with the Pig in the Pond, we can focus on the initial sound, but I'm always looking for opportunities to focus on the vowels inside a rhyme. My rule for myself, I only ever teach a vowel inside a rhyme, because that keeps the sound the vowel is representing consistent. And kids learn pattern by pattern. And I want them to see the visual pattern. I want them to hear the oral pattern, the rhyme. Pig, dig are two words in the text. We might then ask, do you know any other words that rhyme? Pig, dig, fig. And if I teach the letter I as a vowel letter, in this case representing the shorter I sound, and Mari's here, so I have to be very careful I say shorter, not short, because you know, of course, there's no such thing as a short vowel and a long vowel. True? Vowels are all different lengths. We have very long vowels, we have long vowels, we have average length vowels, we have short vowels, we have very short vowels, and then we have the one that's so short it's called the schwa. It drops out, sometimes not there at all. So the truth is we do have vowels of different lengths, but it is okay, Murray, shut your ears, it's okay to talk to kids about longer and shorter, but exaggerate the length of the long ones so they know what you mean, because I want them to learn things like cap, cape, sit, sight, not prep, but give me another one. Any of those, yes. So look, but I think we would be more correct if we referred to shorter and longer. If you want to run with that, fine. But you see, when I'm teaching pig, dig, fig, I can focus on the shorter I sound, and it stays consistently I because it's inside that rhyme, R-I-M-E rhyme, okay? So if we use that rich, authentic text for shared reading, we can achieve so many more of the requirements of the English curriculum, because when we're using these books, we can also talk about character. We can talk about plot and setting. We can talk about beginning, a middle and end. You know, we can cover basically the whole of the English curriculum if we start with rich, authentic text. And the phonics knowledge we help them to learn through that is included, of course. And that, for me, that means that I can do very short, sharp, but effective mini lessons with the whole class as long as it's come out of the text we've been using for shared reading first. And many kids might already know that, and you're helping them to know what they knew. Some kids, it'll be a penny dropping experience. Aha, it's just become clear to them. A few other kids, and hopefully you can notice them, oops, it's still a little bit over their head, and they're the very kids I'll take in a small group later to follow up and redo and check. Okay, and I've got some photos of that happening coming up. We all know Julia Donaldson and how kids love her books. They just love all those ones, the Gruffalo and so on. So, you know, if I'm doing Zog for shared reading and we're revisiting it 2 or 3 days in a row, it gives me an opportunity to focus on that initial Z sound, and I can comment on the fact that it's starting with the letter Z, and that in this instance the Z sound is represented by the letter Z. And I'm hoping that one of my bright bunnies, one of those gifted and talented little preps sitting there, says, I know another one. What is it? Dogs. You are so right. In fact, the letter S is more common spelling for the Z sound than Z. So you see, if we know this, if we have this knowledge, when things like that come up in our classrooms, we can respond appropriately. And you should celebrate when that kid says that. Some teachers were going to shut down and ignore it and move on because, oh, God, he's right, but what do I do? Okay, so that you see, do we still do picture chats? By gosh, I hope we do. And you can see the picture on the bottom there, and in that picture you can probably see feather, fence, flowers, fork, fern, frog, fish and so on. So we might have been looking at 5 fat frogs as well, and all of a sudden, oh, the kids notice that we've got zog and frog. Well, we sure have. Do we know any other words that look similar and sound similar? And away we go. We've got another spelling list again, you see, and we're generating them all the time, but I have dozens of spelling lists going in my classrooms, but they're all generated by the kids and their interaction with me and the text. So I have dozens of spelling lists, but not one of them is a commercial one. Not one of them. Okay, and then I will go to the chart that shows the spellings of the shorter O sound, and we will write those words that we have built ourselves, and we'll write them in on that chart, and other words have appeared there, and they keep building up and building up over time. Here is a possible teaching sequence. Please, on your handout, circle A or do something. The heading is a possible teaching sequence, not the. Got it? But here is a possible teaching sequence. If I'm doing Daisy All Sorts, I'm going to, of course, start with the whole complete text the first time we share it. The whole focus is on enjoyment, reader response. Okay? Enjoyment, maybe information, and reader response is my first priority. And it might include some dramatisation, it might include some music or puppetry and all of those kinds of things. That's when we first introduce the book. But I might also use it as an opportunity to talk to the kids about the beginning of the story, the middle and the end, which is of course appropriate for the first year at school. We might even talk about plot or sequence of events. But once the text has become known and familiar, and they're asking every day, can we have Daisy again? Well, we might have this written on the up somewhere. Daisy is a dog. And we'll talk about the word dog, and we'll talk about the other words that we brainstormed the other day with the OG rhyme. And when I've looked at the whole words like that, my next step will be to break those words into onset and rhyme. Okay? When we've done that, we are going to move to the next step, and I am going to do what any traditional teacher ever did. I am going to point to the letters and have the kids say with me, D, O, G, dog. Yes, of course I'm going to do that, but where is it? It is step 5. It is not step 1. And that's the major difference between teaching phonics in context and not doing so. Too many of the programs being recommended at the moment start with step 5, as if steps 1 to 4 don't matter. Okay? There must be a step 6, because if I stop at step 5, some kids could accidentally come away with the generalisation that the letter O always represents O. That's the last thing I want them to generalise about. So step 6 only takes 20 seconds, 30 seconds, but it's essential. We will make an immediate comparison with other words we've already looked at in other texts we've read and shared earlier. We might consider no, so, go, and remind the kids that the letter O sometimes represents the longer O sound. Because I don't want them thinking from dog, log, jog that it's always O. Okay, I'm avoiding that like the plague. It might be you've done my brother, Anthony Brown, and you look at the letter O in the word brother. But that comparison step might only take 30 seconds, but it's 30 seconds you must not miss. It's really important. Okay. Now, this is the wonderful Tess Sakana. You might notice the books on the ledge there. Can you see our Daft Dog Danny? Another Pamela Allen. Then there's a book called Dog on Log, and there's the other book, Do Your Ears Hang Low? Do They Wobble To and Fro? God, the kids love that. And the terrible thing is, after I was in the room when she was doing that, I was singing that for about 6 weeks. Drove myself crazy. Anyway, the key word here, from all of those books, the key concept here was, it was all about dogs. Okay, so she had a week literature theme on dogs. And so a key word was dog, and if you watch the screen now, you'll see it's a variation, if you like, of the Elkonen technique, where we use counters for the sounds first so that they're not distracted by the eye. We're forcing them, if you like, to use their ear. And as we push one counter up into one box, you know how it works. So if you watch the screen, hopefully you'll see that happen. D, O, U. And see, they're all saying it together with Tess. So they're all saying the D and then the O and then the G. Okay, so can you see that's just a magnetic board with, I think it's plumber's tape stuck on, and the magnetic counters. But then we do move to the letters. Okay, so the first 3 steps is totally focusing on phonemic awareness and requiring them to really use their ears. But as soon as we introduce the letters, it's not phonemic awareness anymore, it is phonics, because it's focusing on the sound-letter connection. And so you can see that Tess is now up to the letter O, but they still say the D, O, because that's what the sounds the letters are representing. We are all the time reinforcing the fact that that O sound for the letter here is only O in the word dog. Again, we might remind them that the letter O can represent other sounds too. Okay, even there. We keep reminding them of that. So eventually they get the whole word spelled out. But you see, I guess that what I'm hoping is that those who have a phonocentric view will appreciate that we're actually doing what they do, but we're doing it a whole lot bloody better. Okay, because it's
a lot of other things at the same time.
Yes, and a lot of other things at the same time, because we're talking about text structure and we're talking, it's all about comprehending and reader response and laughing. Oh my God, laughing. Okay. So that small group that Tess is working with there is the small group that she determined needed to come to her for extra practice of this after the whole class mini lesson during shared reading. So it would have been done with the whole class for shared reading, but mini lesson, if it's the whole class, 2 or 3 minutes, that's it, because it's the whole class. And, for me, the philosophy behind shared reading or shared anything is that all kids are ready to learn something and they will take from it what they're ready to take from it. And why we don't trust ourselves more about that today, I don't know. We have to trust that kids are equal partners in this learning and they will take from it what they're ready to take from it. And you see, it's not just shared reading we're doing. We're also doing reading too, and guided reading and language experience and all the rest. So they're getting that nicely comprehensive program that we needn't worry in shared reading if we don't always know what they're taking from it. Here's confession number 1. This is my 52nd year in education, and honestly, I don't think I've ever seen a time where teachers trust themselves less. And I'm just waiting for teachers to start acting on their professional knowledge and trusting themselves more and remembering that we're teaching little kids. They have hearts and souls. They have feelings and emotions. We cannot bypass them. And in fact, the more we tap into them, the more powerful the learning. And what worries me about the phonocentric, synthetic phonics type, they're robotic, mechanical. It's as if we're teaching robots. And I don't want anything to do with that sort of education, especially when it's my grandkids, right? But what I want for my grandkids, shouldn't I want that for all kids? Yeah, I should want that for all kids. Okay, so you can see that range of books listed there that Tess has been using, and that rich, authentic text does provide for explicit, systematic instruction. I just went through one possible methodology with 6 explicit steps. How dare anybody claim explicit and systematic as if it's only for them? We are teaching phonics explicitly. We are teaching it systematically. Okay? So when we start with this sort of text, we cover a lot of the rest of the curriculum as well. That's in your handout. I'm going to skip on. Could you give me a 5-minute warning when So you also have this on your handout that I'm comparing what I call meaning-driven phonics with extreme phonics. When I first prepared this, I used another term for extreme phonics, but it wasn't appropriate in a mixed audience. So I've opted to stay with this safe one. It's meaning-driven phonics or extreme phonics. That's on your handout. I don't want to spend time reading through that. You can do that in your own time, but it's just summarising some of the differences between one approach being recommended and another. Okay. Here's the other problem with a phonocentric view of the English orthography. It requires them to make up all sorts of strange terms just to get over the difficulties caused by their very view of the nature of our language. It causes them to talk about things called irregular words, and one very important thing I've learned from Pete Bowers and Gina Cook and others is that really very, very few English words are irregular. And yet how often do we see irregular words referred to as a term, and how we might help kids learn them as sight words or whatever. But you see, if you have the phonocentric view, it's necessary to describe some words as irregular because they don't fit that narrow definition of how our language works. Okay, they're not looking at the whole picture. So you have handout notes on some of that, so I'm going to skip. I just did this last night because I knew I wouldn't fit it in. Okay, so I'm going to jump up to this. You see, says and said are completely regular, despite the fact that I usually find them on word lists of irregular words. Let's have a look at why they're actually regular spellings. They're not irregular at all. Look at the word pay. I can take that base word. It's a morpheme in its own right, pay. A morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning. You cannot reduce that three-letter word to anything less and still have a word related to it by meaning. Right, so pay is the basic morphemic unit, but I can add bound morphemes, otherwise known usually as prefixes or suffixes, inflectional endings, derivational, and so on. But with pay plus S, pays, right? Pay plus ing, paying. Now, because the word pay ends with Y, the common convention, you change the Y for I and you add the suffix. Sometimes we don't add the whole ED, especially if the base word ends with a vowel sound. For example, we see that in past tense, many past tense verbs that end with an E, you don't add ED. Okay, you take off the final E before you add the ED. All right, so it's typical convention still operating here. And the same pattern there for lay. Well, it's the same pattern for say. Some people might say, well, why isn't it pays, says, paying, saying, paid, said? So how do we explain that there's been a shift in the vowel sound? We don't say says, though I have heard kids say it. We say says. And we don't say said, we say said. Well, here's where etymology comes in. When we look at the history of that word and where it came from, it probably acquired the shorter e sound because it came from the Old English word for to say, okay, that was spelled with an E. So the pronunciation may change, but the spelling of the base is consistent still. So even when the pronunciation changes, the base stays the same. It's consistent, okay? So what I want to say here is stop calling them irregular. They are not irregular spellings at all. It's not irregularity, it's actually conformity, but it's conforming to morphology, not phonemes or phonology, you see? So the phonology is determined by the morphology, all right? And look at give, have, love. Why not ending, why an E on the end? You see, well, there's a convention, and again, you've got to go back in history, it's all etymology. We have a convention that no word will end with final V, except for some abbreviations. So here, the E on the end has absolutely no phonological function. Okay? And we have to stop teaching as if it's always true that E on the end makes the previous vowel say its long name, because it's often not true. We might teach sometimes that is so, But in this case, the E doesn't make a give, have, love, okay? It's got nothing to do with the previous vowel. I think we have to, I've only got 2 minutes, I think, so I'll skip past this. I'm sorry, but I just have to. I'm going to skip up to this screen. You can see even with these words, can you see the regularity? But in the first word do, the O is representing the oo sound, but in go it's O. But can you see the morphological conformity? You see? In do, does, done, doing, each one of those still starts with do and then adds the ending, all right? And let's look at the phonology of that. In does and goes, the S actually represents the Z sound. And if D-O-N-E is done, why isn't G-O-N-E gun? You see, the sound is too irregular. It's the sound that's irregular, but not the morpheme. All right. So it's not all about sound. You can only call them irregular words if you have a phonocentric view. What about, how do we explain did, the past tense? Well, again, I go to Etom Online so often. It's an extremely valuable resource. And in Old English, the past tense of the verb to do was D-Y-D-E. And it was interesting looking at the first page of Beowulf, you know, where Old English was right back in perhaps, 14th century and earlier. But the past tense back then was D-Y-D-E, and at the time they took the D-E ending stem and added to other verbs to make past tense. It was like, well, a bit silly perhaps analogy, but sing, singed, and so on, okay? But eventually over time the DE become ED. That's how we got it, all right? So a synthetic phonics approach is phonocentric. It fails to understand English. I have to finish, I think, yeah. So, no, it doesn't matter. You've got it in your handout, shush. I just want you to alert you to the fact that I have 2 things you might like to download from my website. One is a reference list to support what I've been talking about today, and one is a 2-page paper. I kept it short to 2 pages in the hope that people would read it. Please make multiple copies, about 10,000 should do, and distribute them. Thank you, everyone.